Welcome everybody. I hope you are all able to see and to hear, and we've got a good number of you online just now for this mini webinar. David Williams spoke to me a couple of months ago about how we can engage some of the informal networks around the church, and so this idea was born. So David is with us, as is Neil Glover. Neil is the convener of the Seeds for Growth Fund Committee, and David the grants manager. So over to David, who's going to present to us for 10-15 minutes, and then we will field your questions. Do pop your questions and comments into the comments section, as you have been doing, saying good morning. Isn't it a lovely day? Beautiful day up here in the north. So over to David.
Thank you, Donald. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We've only got 30 minutes, so we'll press straight ahead. Donald, if you can pull the slides up, that would be great. Thank you. So today's topic is looking at both Seeds for Growth and a very quick view of other sources of funding for mission and ministry. I know this is a question close to your hearts. Within the grants unit, we've got a list of over 60 different funding sources that can be tapped into for church purposes. If it ever capital grants, then always confer with the general trustees on capital grants. But from a revenue perspective, the small grants fund is there within the Church of Scotland. That's for grants up to £1,000 to give you a chance to give something a go, to try out something on a small scale, perhaps to do something innovation in worship, or perhaps to do something online. And also the small grants fund can also do things in the winter, so up to £5,000 for winter support. Benefact Trust has opened what they call two grants, their Community Impact Grant and their Building Improvements Grant. And Church of Scotland churches received over £250,000 last year, 2023 they should be, in funding from last year from them. And the National Churches Trust can provide capital grants and advice, particularly from their Cherish programme, which has been going for about 8 to 12 months now. And finally, of course, Seeds for Growth, our own internal grant funding programme, and that's what I'm going to spend the most time looking at in this webinar. But if you are after a list of potential grant funders, then do get in touch with us. It's grants@churchofscotland.org.uk. So the grants allocated from Seeds for Growth on its own was over £650,000 last year. And this year we have a budget of just over 1.3 million. We're looking forward to allocating grant funding to projects that stimulate growth in the church. We've got two initial priorities set by the regulations. One is developing mission through new worshipping communities and church planting. And the second is engaging with intergenerational approaches and participation in worship with younger people. What do we mean by new worshipping communities? Well, there are three different elements that we see, something called the Pioneer Spectrum, that was thought of by the Church Mission Society. So replicating or planting churches, that's taking a revitalized model of church and trying it in a new place, either by putting it into a current church building or by setting up something completely new. We've got adapting, that's pioneers who modify an idea from somewhere else and then modify it for the local context, because context is very important. And we certainly promote that people should do mission mapping within any area they're going to work in the future. And third is innovating, that's pushing the boundaries of what church is and seeking to find out ways to connect people to do church in a new way. And we're seeing some interesting ideas come through now from some of the grant ideas coming through Seeds for Growth. And why are we so focused on new worshipping communities and church planting in particular? Well, research has shown that for large sectors of the population, that new worshipping communities offer the most effective means of sharing our faith. Neil can come up with the stats, something like 1 in 400, sorry, for every 400 people in the standard worshipping community, there's one baptism. But to get one baptism in a new worshipping community is about 25 people, so they're far more effective at doing that. And then working with young people, we're trying to emphasize enabling young people to come to faith, giving a space where young people can interact with their peers, and also integrating over a different group of projects. So exploration of faith isn't necessarily the key part of the other element's purpose, but drop-ins, activity-based clubs, personal development courses, etc. And then also looking at intergenerational spaces, so helping young people to interact with other members of the congregation and to learn from them and to learn from each other. And then supporting particularly new worshipping communities aimed at young people, but also ensuring that young people have got agency. So ensuring that they have a significant scope to shape, lead, and participate in the places where they worship. So what are the grants that we have to offer? We do have a website. It needs updating. I know that there's one or two things that say that we're about to launch them, where I think everything is currently underway. Thank you for putting up the page there, Donald. So what we can and can't fund. So we can fund training, salaries, equipment, and hire of space, as long as it's essential to the aims of the project. But what we can't fund within Seeds for Growth are church repairs, retrospective costs, so if you already paid for things and we can't cover those costs, and shortfalls in existing congregational income. So we're not there to try and help churches to keep going from day to day, but we're there to actually do new things. In terms of funding posts, so note that any role that's supported by Seeds for Growth needs to be on a local contract. So things can't come as a new MDS post within 1-to-1. That's not something that we can provide. MDS posts can't be topped up by Seeds for Growth grants. And if there's a local post that a current MDS staff worker perhaps is working part-time wants to apply for, they can apply for that, but it's going to be an additional role to the current one. It's not topping up their current role, and that's done through normal processes. So who can apply? All applications require presbytery approval. So for level 1 and level 2 grants, we'll come on to say what they are in a second in terms of the levels of grants we have. Please obtain prior approval before sending the application through your mission officer or director, or apply directly to the presbytery to ask who is the appropriate person to speak to. For level 3 and level 4 grants, then the liaison with the presbytery will happen through the grants unit and send us application forms, and we'll then speak to them about the support that they're providing for the project. So the 4 levels of grants, first one is level 1. You can apply at any time. There's no set closing date, and we aim to provide a decision within 2 weeks. Sorry, it's been somewhat longer recently because I've had some various issues in my family, but we have a maximum award of £1,000 for that. And they're there to try and help you to experiment with a small scale and test something out with a new project idea, perhaps to lay the foundations for a new project by doing a community audit or something similar. You can run a small scale event, or perhaps develop the skills and knowledge, perhaps apply for a training course, do something to engage with people further on down in the fund. Level 2 grants are up to £10,000. Again, you can apply at any time. There's no set closing date, and we aim to provide decisions for that within 6 weeks. Maximum award is £10,000, and any further grants beyond that for the same subject will ask for the report before we can then provide a larger grant. Level 2 grants are there for you to pilot an idea, to test out something as its viability. You can apply for something for 6 to 12 month time frame, so you could have 2 level 2 grants in the same year, so up to £20,000 effectively. The nature of the work suggests that perhaps year by year funding could be the most appropriate funding, or the project perhaps isn't quite ready for a longer term funding yet, and it's worth having a go perhaps for a year or so just to see how it works out. And level 3 grants, we're getting into more substantial funds here. They're awarded for core funding of projects where you've done some research or tested out the ideas beforehand. Maximum award is up to £40,000 per year, And we're saying that initially that can be for 3 years, but there's the option then perhaps of applying for a further 2 years once we've seen how the project develops. It's a two-stage process. Stage 1 is always open. You can apply to us for an initial proposal form from grants@churchofscotland.org.uk. I'll then take a look at that and see whether it fits criteria, etc., and give you some feedback on it, and give you the full application forms then if it is something that fits the criteria. And there are 2 dates for closure of that in the year. The first one has already gone by, that was on 20th of March, but the second one is going to be a date in October, and the date is yet to be specified, but we'll let you know as soon as that's available on the website. Then level 4 grants, these are up to £100,000 per year, so we're anticipating this is probably grants that would only be applied for by a presbytery. And that's again the £100,000, but up to 3 years, and then with the potential of applying for a further 2 years beyond that. And that's already open. Please contact us for an initial conversation about that, and we'll probably link you up with one of the committee members to have a conversation about the project and to understand more about it before we take it further. We're always looking for sustainability in projects. The funding that we have from the Assembly trustees is a one-off spend, and therefore we're looking for things that will become self-sustaining within the course of the project. And also we're looking to, it's not just about the activities and things that are done, but also it's about exciting interest and activity across the church. So we're planning to bring people together to share their experiences of what they're doing, so we can learn from each other what's working, what's not working. Sometimes something may be presented and said, well, this hasn't worked here, but someone else in the audience will say, oh, well, our situation's a bit different. We can do this and this instead, and that's a really great idea. And also these things complement the sorts of meetings that are held by Forge Cairn, where people have come together, they meet regularly, and they discuss the ideas they've already come up with. We can't review draft applications, but we do want to help by answering any questions you have about the fund, the forms, the application process. You can contact us at any time and ask those questions. So that's a breakneck pace because of the length of the webinar presentation about what we have to offer. As I said, there are 60 names of grant organisations which are available from ourselves as well for other funders. But certainly the Benefact Trust is a good place to start, along with the Small Grants Fund. Benefact Trust can't provide 100% of funding for things, but their Senior Grants Officer, Andrew Bass, is very open to being contacted at the very early stages of discussion to find out what the project is, what you intend to do, and the sorts of levels of funding they could provide. Thank you. You're on mute, Donald.
Thank you, David. And in the chat, Gladys, I'm not sure if that was a question. You were saying last connect at level 3. Maybe you can expand a wee bit if that's a question. If anyone else has questions for David or for Neil. Neil, do you want to add anything to what David has been saying while we get some questions coming through in the chat? We're getting some questions coming through now. Anything you want to say at this stage, Neil?
Just to absolutely echo what David has been saying, we really want to work with people as best we can in order to bring ideas to fruition. This is David at the very, very start of Seeds for Growth City wanted us to be a funder plus, which means that we don't just passively wait for applications, but we see ourselves very much as the fund is the national life of the church in working alongside local people to enable new ideas, specifically new worshipping communities and faith-based youth work. And this is all with the overall strapline of supporting the numerical and spiritual growth of the Church of Scotland. So I would just want to heartily echo everything that David has just said.
Michelle and a few others have been asking if the information will be available for them to digest more slowly after the event. David, your PowerPoint presentation will be able to be shared
Indeed.
with
Yes,
folk.
I'll send that across to you.
We'll get that out to everyone who had registered for the webinar. So we've got the email addresses. I now understand Gladys's comment that was about losing the internet connection at level 3. Hope you're back with us now. Any other questions or comments? Please pop them into the chat. Elizabeth saying thank you. I hope the information has been helpful for folk, and that it might get some of the creativity flowing, and now you know how some of those things can be funded. Seems to be a quiet bunch in. Oh, there's are details of accepted projects available for inspiration? There's a good question. David, maybe you could tell us about a couple of projects that, specific projects that have been funded through Seeds for Growth.
Sure, I'll refer that particular question on to Neil, but just to say I'm always reticent to give examples, personally. And the reason being is that as soon as people say, oh, there's an idea, perhaps we can do something similar, and they rush into it and they just copy it. We're not after that. We're after things specific to your area, to your particular problems and issues, etc. So we're really encouraging people to try things in a new way, to try new things themselves. But Neil, in case people are completely lacking in inspiration, what things have struck you as being interesting and important?
Yes, just to echo that, I think for every project, the recommendation is that there be quite a long period of relationship building and engagement. Now, many Church of Scotland congregations already do that, so you may well have been doing quite a lot of that already. But through that you will become aware of a group of people in your congregation or your parish who it would be good to do a worshipping community with. So I'll just use the context of Aberfeldy here and the surrounding area. There's about 4 or 5 different groups that we might be able to connect with. There are the young farmers. What would church look like for them? Because Sunday mornings is not great, but they're very committed to community action. They have a very strong sense of creation. That's a massive thing for them. So what might it work to develop faith amongst the young farmers? We also have a whole bunch of artists and poets who live in Aberfeldy. They love yoga and they love coming to the local coffee shop. What would it be like to develop them? Because many of them actually come from faith backgrounds and want to develop that. Church on a Sunday morning probably doesn't work for them. We also have a real challenge as well with our young people's work, where we often work with capacity building and thinking how does that then move or sometimes move into discipleship and faith. Finally, we have a messy church, and the question is how does that grow into fuller discipleship? I should add that we don't fund messy church alone, but we have accepted one application for people who were using messy church as part of a much wider ecosystem of work that they were doing. So really the question, and we can help fund this, particularly at level 1 and level 2 level, is people saying we want to do some research, we want to develop some ideas, we know the people, we want to think about what's going to work, it's going to take some funding, we're going to have to try some ideas. Level 1 and 2 will fund that sort of work. The second question, so let me give you some ideas of the things that people have done. There's a choir church that some people have tried. There is, as already said, the Messy Church. There's another group who are really developing faith-based aspects of their youth work, and that's actually very intergenerational and is connecting with the existing church. We're also very inspired by some of the work that's gone on in Kilmarnock. So they have a group that's based around a gym, and they have a group which is a digital space. But very often, the projects that people really want to engage with are around specific areas. So is there a specific area in your community where people generally don't come to church? And how do we engage with that? So that's a big thing. And then finally, there are 2 garden projects where people are wanting to use gardening and creation to create a creative space for people to worship and gather in. So with the massive important point that the research and context comes first, those are some of the ideas of some of the successful projects that people have put together.
Thank you for that, Neil. A few folk asking similarly, let's hear about some of the good news stories. William asking about current projects. Michelle saying a Dragon's Den type thing where different groups are pitching. But maybe there's an opportunity for folk to share their good news stories. I think we want to do that, and through this group, I'm certainly keen to make that happen. So if you've got a good news story, let's
That's
share
an
it.
interesting idea, Donald, that we run our grant giving processes as instead of using the forms-based approach that we've got at the moment, we run it as Dragon's Den. And that's not completely preposterous, because that's what Irvine and Kilmarnock did in setting up their 7 new worshiping communities. So who knows? Thank you, Michelle. Wild worship, yes. Michelle's put that up in the chat. Yes. So wildness, and that shows up in a few of the garden projects that we've seen, I think is a massively underutilized, if I can use that expression, form of engagement. If you think the whole of the New Testament happens outdoors, the Celtic church, their whole sense of liturgy was thoroughly grounded in the outdoors. A figure that I particularly found inspirational is John Muir, who saw worship in the wild. So please, some idea of creating church in the wild would be fantastic. I have to say, I think there's one particular challenge in that is how to make it accessible, particularly with people who have mobility challenges. And that's something we're wrestling with in our context. But please, please think about wildness. That would be a thing.
Derek has a question specifically about salaries. David, I think you said in your presentation that salaries could be covered. Would it apply in this music group scenario if employing a music teacher was part of the plan?
So salaries are an important part of most projects where you're trying to get something substantial going. It depends on the circumstance. The project's got to be described. You've got to tell us what you're trying to do. I have said, as we're keen to do, is to try and find ways of making something sustainable. But I do understand that for working with young people and for working in priority areas, parishes, that can be difficult to do. But we are certainly looking for ways in which these things can be sustained either within themselves or within the context of the wider church as we work through, and that's an important part of the application process.
Thank you for that. And Marcus, seeking clarification, level 1 and 2 would need to be approved by presbytery before an application can be made.
So our current regulations actually state that only presbyteries or groups of presbyteries can apply for funding from Seeds for Growth. And the way we're interpreting that, because you understand that many of the ideas will come from churches themselves, is that churches can come up with the idea, can fill in the application form, but presbyteries have to give their approval before we can consider it as an application.
Thank you. Hannah Sanderson mentioning the culture of innovation community. There's a Facebook group there, and that would be another place to explore the possibilities, the innovations. Thanks for that, Hannah.
And to go with that, Donald, so Hannah is now on the Seeds for Growth team, working the Assembly Trustees group. She is working on helping us to roll out a training program across the country to allow people to understand more about making applications to the fund, and also is putting together some of our work doing road shows across the country. So we have 2 coming up, one in Edinburgh, and then one in Glasgow, or the other way around. And those are coming up in the first or second week of May. So please keep an eye out for those. More information will be coming shortly. But Hannah also, as I said, put together that innovation program within the Church of Scotland, and that is available from Church of Scotland Learning.
Thank you. Rory is asking about criteria of success. Neil or David,
Neil.
do you want to?
Yeah, so I've got huge amounts of respect for Rory, but I want to reject the premise of his question. The phrase criteria of success is somewhat an ugly term, and I wouldn't really want to be using that. But I want to pick up on that, and also Ella's comment, which is increased measure can be used as a measure of success. So the terms of the fund is that this is about numerical and spiritual growth, and the Assembly trustees who put that together were quite unashamed about that. Now, clearly, quantity can become an idol, and we would not want to go down that route. But this is about growth in Christian discipleship. If you want to use the 5 marks of mission, I've often been quite critical of 5 marks of mission, but if we can use them at this point, then it's numbers 1 and 2. It's about proclaiming the kingdom and seeing people come to faith. I would want to challenge us and say that as a mainline Church of Scotland, we have often been extremely good, and I'm talking about some of my own context here, about making connections with our neighbourhoods. And that is fantastic, and there is definitely a theology that says that is the kingdom. But the New Testament and life of Jesus also summons us in towards making disciples, of seeing people come to faith who do not currently engage with the life of the church. And that is absolutely at the heart of Seeds for Growth. And I think that's something that we have struggled with in the church. And I think that Seeds for Growth and the whole Assembly trustees and a lot of us are really being summoned into that question. Now, that discipleship will not be a carbon copy of what discipleship might look like in certain other contexts, particularly some of the more dominant contexts in church literature at the moment. But it is about discipleship. And yeah, that is certainly something that's a huge part of our biblical calling, I believe, and is at the heart of the fund.
And following on from that, Ella is asking about, is increased membership a measure of success?
So similar answer to that, and I know Ella says, please say no. So membership, no, but discipleship, yes. But how you talk about discipleship will be tricky. It will not be at the moment, the forms would encourage you slightly down a route of saying, please tell us how many new disciples you have, or something like that. But we're looking at a new form of understanding where people are in their projects, which takes account of just that these things are much harder to quantify than we sometimes think. And we've worked with some really interesting people about asking our people who are applicants, where are we getting to? And that will be the way that we come to understand, where are you? But certainly discipleship will be a big part of that.
And similarly, Michelle's comment about wild worship is saying, are you going to fund Christian communities that will never be in the pews? And I think your comment there about discipleship covers that, and hopefully the answer is yes. Such initiatives and innovations could be funded.
The answer is absolutely yes. I can see that Michelle, in the phrasing of our question, I don't want to presume, Michelle, but it says, would you genuinely fund an emerging Christian community? And the answer is, we need genuine Christian communities which are like that. So yes.
Alan Childs has a question about, I'll give you a chance to read it. It's about funding for building development, but with mission discipleship very much at the end of the process. Is that a valid use of Seeds of Growth funding? He's also asked another question about assistance in acquiring a plot of land to develop a community centre.
If I start with the plot of land question, so I've identified that this is a key issue that we're seeing from discussions we're having, and this is the precursors to applications. And one of the things is certainly about new build areas. We've had one application already from a church that's on the edge of its current town, but will be, by the time the new build has happened, in the centre of their town, which is a great opportunity for them to be missional in their community and to set up the community in the first place. And so I have already set up a meeting with the general trustees to discuss how we can take a common approach to new build areas, and we're hoping to have more information about that in the next few months.
And I think Alan's asking an in-principle question here. And I think in principle, and I'm looking across to David to make sure we're on the page, but I think in principle, there is no objection to that. The criteria of the fund is spiritual and numerical growth, and then we've added 2 extra bits which say through new worshipping communities and through faith-based work with people under the age of 40. One of the things that we've decided in the fund is if you start adding extra conditions to that for no real reason, there are a couple of governance things that have to be addressed. So you absolutely have to make sure that you're doing your financials in a responsible way. You have to make sure you're doing the safeguarding. If you're employing somebody, you have to make sure that you've done an open employment process, or at least tell us how you got to where you are and it was done in a fair way. So there are kind of a few governance things in there that have to be there. But other than that, the test is whatever it takes for you to establish new worshipping communities of faith-based work with people under the age of 40, leading to spiritual growth, spiritual numerical growth, whatever it takes. I would like to think that we will try and help you and support you in that. So I think that's a long way of saying yes to that question.
And a final question from Rory. Will new worshipping communities enjoy sacramental permission?
Rory, I think most people will know that Rory is the clerk of Clerio and E, and I would be asking the clerk for help with that question. As Rory probably knows, this is. People also asked about ecumenical projects. We definitely fund ecumenical projects and encourage that. That's outside the remit of Seeds for Growth. But speaking as Neil Glover rather than as the convener, I would have a lot of sympathy with the impetus behind that question.
Thank you, Rory, for that question. Doesn't seem to be anything else in the chat, and we are at just after 12:30. I hope you've all found this very helpful, and I would certainly be keen to pick up on the comments about sharing the good news stories, and if the It's for Ministry group can be a place for that to happen, then do talk to me. Excellent. A final word from you, David, as we wrap up.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. Please do get in contact with us via the grants@churchofscotland.org.uk email address. Very happy to send out lists and the presentation pack from today via Donald. We look forward to working with you. We want to see those projects out there successful, working, and sharing with each other what they're doing. And if they're not successful in working, then sharing what's not working as well, which is also vitally important so we can learn from the issues that we face.
Thank you very much indeed, David and Neil. The PowerPoint presentation will wing its way to you all, and you've got the web address there for Seeds for Growth Fund, and grants at churchofscotland.org.uk is the best way to contact David. Thank you all very much indeed for joining in this mini webinar. Enjoy the rest of your lunchtime. Thank you very much indeed.